8 months of off-season speculation and a lot of patience brought us to this week. Notre Dame and Navy kick off this Saturday in Ireland, and just 5 days later, Nebraska starts their run on a Thursday night. Depth charts are coming out around the country. The official predictions and expectations are all over TikTok, and by next Monday, it'll officially be football season. Matt Rule wrapped up his first fall camp in Lincoln and had plenty of great updates to share that gave us more insight into how this team will look. So today, I'm asking Adam Carriker about some of his preseason predictions, and I'll get his thoughts on the final notes from fall camp. But what's up, guys? I'm Connor Hayden, and this is Corn Crazed. If you're a fan of Nebraska or the Big Ten, hit the subscribe button for more content just like this. And if you want me to do more collabs with other personalities and YouTubers, hit the like button and help us get to 1,000. But now, let's get into it.
Thompson winds up, goes deep, got a man, touchdown!
We're back with Adam Carriker. 3 weeks ago, we got to go live together, and he answered a ton of great questions that I had for him, and some of them from the comment section. Today, Adam, I've got a lot more from you. I've got some off Instagram that people had fired off to me, and I've got some I came up with on my own. But first, I wanted to know how you're doing and how your 8-part interview series went.
Really good. I was excited to do rare interviews with Prince Amukamara, Roy Halou, guys who just hardly ever talk. And then the Osborne interview. The toughest thing about interviewing Osborne is there's like literally 4 million questions you could ask him. How do you narrow it down to just 1 million? And so that's always a fun interview. Chatting with Jim Pillen, the governor. I know everyone's like, oh my God, politics, but we kept it mostly football, like 99.8%. So he is a former black shirt, two-time first team All Big 8 performer. Had one of the most memorable plays in Husker football history. So that was a fun interview as well. Chatted with Tony White, defensive coordinator, and just put out actually my interview with Amon Green today. Was not able to connect with Marcus Satterfield. It's like he's coaching a football team or something, trying to put together an offense, I guess. We'll try to connect down the road as well. And then coming up next is Larry the Cable Guy, Rex Burkhead, and then I guess we'll start playing some football. So it's gone pretty well.
Well, it sounds like you got a lot of them in, but I'm excited to see the others. I haven't gotten to watch Amon Green yet, and I'm excited for Rex Burkhead because he's one of my favorite Nebraska Huskers ever. But I've got my first question for you. We're going to start off with some preseason predictions, and then we'll move into the end of fall camp kind of storylines and get your thoughts on there. But
Okay.
My first question, what's the single most important game of the season for Nebraska this year?
Well, the player answer is the next one. That's what the player in me immediately says, because I've been trained for years that it is always the next one, whoever that opponent is. Now that I'm not a player, I'm a former player, and I'm definitely not a coach. I can jump around and, I can do more things that are more interesting and or fun. I mean, 2 games always stand out to me. Colorado, well, not always, but for this year, Colorado, and then always Iowa. So those are the 2 games that stand out to me. And when I did my win-loss record prediction from a week ago, I actually, without even realizing, predicted them to win both of those games. So I do think it would be hard, very hard, if we lost to Colorado, considering how bad they were last year. They're like the new team in America. They look like a youth football team in their videos. I know they've got some athletes, and Prime's brought in, his Louis Vuitton bags and all that. But I think Colorado, and then obviously as we wind down the season, Iowa.
I think Colorado makes a lot of sense because I think it's just such a dagger to the fans if they lose that one. That'd be 3 straight losses to Colorado in recent history. And it would obviously set a negative tone for the next few games following, because you'd have Louisiana Tech and Northern Illinois right after, and it'd feel kind of like how the Georgia Southern game felt going into Oklahoma. With Iowa, I'd like to get the momentum going into 2024 if we're gearing up to have another big season then. So both of those make sense. I'd argue that Iowa is the most important because 2024, I think, is a really big season for Matt Rule being his second. Next question. I've seen this on Twitter. I got this in my messages. Would you be more surprised to see the team go 4-8 or 9-3?
That is a phenomenal question. And it's a phenomenal question simply because if you combine Matt Rule's record in his first year at Temple and his first year at Baylor, he doesn't have 4 combined wins. He has three. I believe it was two at Temple, one at Baylor in year one of each one of those programs as he was building them up. But it's interesting. Like I said, I predicted Nebraska to go 7-5 this year. So it's like the most grandiose year one Matt Rule's ever had in college football as he's building a program if he's able to do that. You look at the schedule, it's not uber tough. Maybe they shock the crap out of everybody and get 9 wins. At the same time, Matt Rule has difficult year ones. It's part of how he builds the program. It's part of what happens. I think I would be more surprised. It's really a coin flip. I think just given his track record, I'd be more surprised if they went 9-3. And I know that's not going to make Husker fans happy. Sorry. But I do think I would be more surprised. Remember when 9 games, since 2016? It's been 7 years or something like that. And that's just not Matt Rule's track record. So I don't think they're going to do either. But I would be more surprised if they had 9 wins than if they had 4.
I think the only thing holding me back from saying I'd be more surprised by 4 is if you look at the close losses from last year. That team was a potential 8-win team if you count the 3, 3, 6, 7, and 1 point loss. That's 5 games, less than 1 score. And obviously 2021, we saw kind of the same scenario. 4 wins would be really tough to stomach, even given his track record. I'm going to say I'd be more surprised by the 4 wins. But I get what you're saying. And I think there's a lot of people, especially in the comments below, who are going to be on your side. Next one is, who's your Big Ten West winner? And before you answer this, I wanted to let you know what Vegas thinks. Wisconsin first, Iowa second, Illinois third, Minnesota fourth, and Nebraska at 5th. Their odds are plus 1,400 versus Minnesota plus 600. So Vegas doesn't think Nebraska has much of a chance.
So initially when you hear Wisconsin, you're like, oh, it's because it's Wisconsin. Of course they picked Wisconsin. And that was my initial thoughts. They got a new coach and they're putting in a new offense. Apparently they're going to, implement this thing called the forward pass. It's revolutionary there for the Badgers. And then what's sad is they continue to beat us without the forward pass. So maybe that's a bad joke. But you look at their schedule. Wisconsin and Iowa have 2 of the easiest schedules, along with Penn State, in the entire Big Ten Conference. Okay. And yeah, Nebraska doesn't exactly have murderer's row. You look at Purdue, they have probably the toughest schedule in the entire country. Definitely the Big Ten. You look at, and I know Colorado's not Big Ten. I just enjoy pointing out that Colorado has the second toughest schedule in the country. So that's going to be fun to watch. But I come back to Wisconsin, and I come back to Wisconsin simply because they have an easier schedule. I truly think Baby Ferentz is going to have a little bit of an issue finding an identity on offense, trying to get to 25 points a game, and he may abandon what has worked for them for so long. And so I truly think they may have some issues down the road. The actual team that I would come to next after Wisconsin is actually Minnesota. Now, the issue with Minnesota is they have I think it's the second toughest schedule of the Big Ten. They actually have a more talented quarterback, which is crazy. They actually have a more explosive, I'm not going to say better, a more explosive running back. You could argue they have more talent than they've had in 3 or 4 years, but they got a brutal schedule. So that's the only thing that holds me back on Minnesota. So for those reasons, I'm going to go with Wisconsin, even though my initial reaction will everybody goes with Wisconsin. That doesn't make any sense. Well, I'm going with Wisconsin just because everybody else I have these gigantic question marks about. I know there's a lot of new at Wisconsin, but I feel like they can always just hand the ball off to their running back, who's a freaking stud if all else fails. So,
well, I think they also have the coach who's done it before, right? Obviously, Ferentz has, but do we believe in the offensive coordinator, like you're saying? What's interesting about Minnesota is they're the only team out of this group that I gave you that has to play 2 of the big 3 from the East. So their schedule is rough, and that's one thing that's going to hold them back. Speaking of Minnesota, I want to know the most likely game that Nebraska wins out of these 3 Big Ten road games. Minnesota, Illinois, or Michigan State?
Well, everyone wants me to say Minnesota. I think that's the most least likely because we haven't seen anything.
Yeah.
You got a coach going into his 7th year at home with PJ Fleck versus a coach who's trying to build something first year one, a guy who doesn't have a great track record in year one. It's not that he can't win games this year. I'm not saying he can't, on the road early in the season. So that seems like the least likely to me. I have no idea what to make of Michigan State. I mean, early on in Mel Tucker's tenure, they were a top 10 team, won a New Year's Six bowl game, and they've been about the exact opposite. At times, most of the time since then, I have no idea what to make of that team. So to me, it's either Illinois or Michigan State. Traditionally, my instant reaction is Illinois, just because the tradition, versus a Michigan State who has won Big Ten championships in the past decade or so. Won a Rose Bowl not too long ago, maybe a little over 10 years ago. They've had some of that success. Like I said, New Year's Bowl game, top 10 team in the past 3 years. My gut instantly goes to Illinois, but I'm not very confident on that.
The only issue I have with Illinois is it's right after the Michigan game. Nebraska's going to be pretty beat up. I think Michigan State's got to be my pick because they're the least talented of these three, I think, right now. And it's a really tough place to play, but I think the situation being later in the season, not sandwiched between the really tough games or being the first game like Minnesota is, will make this one an easier matchup. But in my prediction video, I called for a Michigan State loss. So what do I know? So there's hype around Devin. What was that?
I said, we'll see what happens. That's
Exactly.
what makes college football great, is so unpredictable.
None of our predictions are going to hit anyway. So we just get to watch it play out. So there's hype around Devin Brown at Ohio State, the quarterback there. And I think the biggest concern was that they didn't know what they were going to get at quarterback, right? So everyone assumed, at least everyone who I talked to, thought that Michigan was going to go back and beat them again, end up in the college football playoff. But if you had to pick who wins the Big Ten today, who are you going to go with?
I'm predicting Michigan, and I know, of course, take the odds-on favor. I'm not even predicting Ohio State to finish second. I think Penn State, who has the easiest schedule in the Big Ten, they have multiple talented running backs coming back. They got a couple of beasts on defense. They got a left tackle who could potentially be a top 5 draft pick. A quarterback, they've been waiting for a while to start there. He's a talented young guy who's finally going to get his opportunity to start and show what he can do. So I'm going with Penn State to actually finish higher than Ohio State, because Ohio State has, and I know all the hoopla about the quarterback, but they got issues up front on the offensive line. Is that going to be solved? They're going to plug those holes. They haven't played defense there in about 3 years. Is that all of a sudden going to be solved as well? So I think Penn State actually finishes ahead of Ohio State. So there's my bold prediction, so to speak. And a lot of that is due to a much, 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 much friendlier schedule as well. So I do think Michigan is better than Penn State, but that's why I think Penn State actually finishes ahead of Ohio State.
It's interesting. Michigan has to play at Michigan State and at Penn State. So I'm actually going to take Ohio State as my number 1, Penn State is my number 2, and Michigan is my number 3. But again, we'll just have to see how it plays out. So fall camp ended on Saturday. Matt Rule went on, talked about some depth chart and what we should expect, I guess, going forward. He said, what did he say about the depth chart? That he's surprised that people were so interested and he hasn't gotten this many questions about it before. I'm actually surprised that people don't ask at Baylor, but this is Nebraska and everyone wants to know every little detail. So I want to know what your thoughts on Gabe Ervin being marked down as running back 1 after he was the 3rd last year. And do you think we see more Anthony Grant or Ramir Johnson behind him?
I wasn't surprised about Gabe. I mean, Matt Rule spoke very highly of him early on when you got a 222-pound, 23-pound running back, and Matt Rule's like he's one of the fastest players on the team. And then I think people forget, Gabe started his first game ever as a true freshman. No running back. Think about all the running backs that have come through Nebraska. No running back in the history of Nebraska football has ever started their first game as a true freshman. Now, unfortunately, as we all know, he got injured, but he's been able to bounce back from that. And, I watched a highlight tape from over the weekend, and I think 3 of the first 5 or 6 highlights was Gabe Ervin breaking tackles and running over people, which, isn't going to thrill Tony White, so to speak. But I'm not surprised by Gabe starting at all. Anthony is an elite talent. Anthony Grant's an elite talent, but if you're fumbling the ball, that's a big problem. And that is a major reason not to start a guy. My son is a defensive end. He's in 8th grade. He's on a nationally competitive 8th grade tackle football team. My son gets a ton of sacks every game, and he's equally awful at keeping contained. And as good as he is at getting after the quarterback, I am stunned at his lack of awareness that, hey, that guy's running around you. He's running around you. He's running over and over and over again. And I said, if you're going to lose contain that often, you better get 3 sacks for every time you lose contain, because when you lose contain, it's a big play. And so it's kind of like that with running backs. If you're going to fumble that much, you better be breaking off 90-yard touchdown runs a ton. And obviously that's not going to happen as much in at an elite level, that Nebraska's playing at. So Gabe Ervin, if Anthony can take care of the rock, he's going to be right there. We all know that. And then Ramir's a guy that's finally getting a little bit of attention, flown under the radar. Maybe he's a third down back. Maybe he can be that guy. I think if Anthony can take care of the rock, he's back number 2. If not, then it's Ramir. You got to take care of the ball. I mean, we actually moved my son to D tackle. It was my suggestion. I was like, well, if you're not going to keep contain, you can get sacks from the D tackle spot, and you don't have to worry about keeping contain. So we're going to see how that goes. So we'll see how Anthony Grant does to taking care of the rock.
It's interesting because, the fumbling issues 100% is going to be a problem that'll hold him back. But also running downhill, you notice with Gabe Ervin, I went back and watched some of those highlights. I'm sure you did. And he runs downhill. He runs low to the ground. He gets his shoulder pads down. He's going to hit you straight on like a Big Ten running back would. I think that is a big draw for Matt Rule. He's like, geez, I got a Big Ten running back right here, whereas Anthony is more finesse, like I've talked about. Ramir, though, he can hit too, and he'll hit holes hard. He's also got that receiving back to him. So I really hope we get to see all 3 of them. One of the comments you made was that the best unit on the entire team, or the best position group on the entire team, was the running backs. So I'm hoping that pans out, and it looks like it could. On the defensive line, you've got Cam Lenhart listed as as a starter with Blaze Gunnerson. He's a true freshman. And I wanted to know what your thoughts were as his ceiling as a true freshman on the D-line in the Big Ten. And is this a sign that we could have another future Adam Carriker level pass rusher?
Well, to put a button on the running back thing, how well the running backs do really depends on the offensive line. And I know you know that, but I just wanted to throw that out there because I know somebody's going to point it out in the comments below. Yes, we're aware of that. The offensive line is unless you've got Barry Sanders back there, the only running back I've ever seen that didn't need an offensive line at all, ever. Unless he's Barry Sanders, we know the offensive line matters. Now, as far as the defensive line, it's interesting. When I was coming in, it was a different time. Like most guys redshirted. To come in and play as a true freshman was far less common back then. I played before the first ever sophomore won a Heisman Trophy, Tim Tebow. That was after I was done playing. Then the first ever freshman and Johnny Manziel, like younger players excelling earlier and earlier is something that's really more recent within the past 15 or so years. Before then, guys redshirted more often than not, and it was usually juniors and seniors on the All-America team. You had the random sophomore every once in a while. Like a Maurice Claret was insanely rare. Okay, and I think it was Mike Williams was the receiver at USC way back in the day. I believe he was a true freshman. Guys like those are the only 2 guys I can think of that were, you go back to the 80s, Herschel Walker, like 3 guys spanning 40 plus years that I can think of that were on that level as true freshmen like that. Now, when you talk about Cam, okay, and the point I was getting to is I was told the 2 position groups that you're the least likely of all the position groups to play as a freshman are O-line, D-line, because of the physical development that has to happen. Okay, like the years and the time that has to be put into the weight room and the physical development to like an 18-year-old matching up against a 23-year-old, so to speak, who's been in that weight room for 5 years, growing up from basically a boy into a man. And so it's very rare that you would see that. Now it's more and more common. You see younger guys playing, younger guys excelling. So as far as Cam being an or on the depth chart as a potential starter on the D line, I think it tells you 2 things. I think it tells you, number 1, his talent, his ability, his potential. I think it tells you, number 2, our lack of depth and experience on the defensive line. I think it's a combination of both of those things.
Yeah, I think both of those things are true. And I think the one thing that I'm looking for at Nebraska at this point is to see that line develop. And I'm hoping that Cam can be the guy who we can see anchor it at this point, because you're going to lose some interior guys in the future with Ty Robinson and Nash. And then who's going to be the one who steps up? Obviously, Prince Will's another name we're looking to, but yeah, I'm excited to see if we do have somebody who can be an elite level edge for them. Another name that we want to talk about, Chubba Purdy, listed as the number 2 with Heinrich Harburg. I was surprised to see this because we know that Purdy's the better passer. We also know that Heinrich Harburg was in a practice film or practice clip catching balls as a receiver, it looked like. So if it came down to it and Sims wasn't going to play in a game, who do you think Rule would choose? Even though there's an or between the two, is he going with Chuba or is he going with Heinrich?
So that's a tough question to answer without, I mean, I have not watched every single practice. I have not broken down the practice film. You know, that's tough because if you go based off the game film from last year, like Chuba, your initial reaction is the other guy, you know, not Chuba. But there's no game film of Harburg. Not that I can recall anyway, so I
No.
have nothing to reference, and I don't have the reference for, you know, the practices that they've been to up to this point. The little bit that I've seen, I have chatted about it in the past. Harburg's got a great frame. He's got a big arm. He is much faster than people realize. And Chuba's obviously physically talented in his own right. But it was mentioned last year. He tends to get nervous, overwhelmed sometimes, and maybe a little too excited in the huddle. And part of that's being a young guy. But I also just mentioned, you know, young guys are excelling at a faster rate than they ever have in the history of college football. It used to be rookie quarterbacks were either awful or they just didn't play as rookies. There's a reason Peyton Manning has the all-time rookie interception record as a quarterback, the one record he's admitted he'd like to get rid of. You know, but so guys are doing things at younger and younger ages in college and the NFL. So for me, I would have to first see Chuba calm in a game-like setting because you cannot be, I don't want to say frantic, but you can't be overly excited as a quarterback or a cornerback. Those are the two spots you have to have the shortest memories and you have to be the absolute calmest. So I think I've seen both of their skill sets. I think Heinrich, you know, his ceiling is through the roof, and I would err towards Heinrich Harburg. But yeah, I don't put a lot of weight on that just because I have a lack of film that I've been able to watch at this point.
Fair enough. Purdy was 22 of 48 with 3 interceptions last year. I think if it came down to it, I'd be more comfortable seeing Purdy in there because I know he's got the legs to be able to do what Heinrich can do to a point, right? He's not as fast, but he can move around. And it does give them that dual threat option, whereas I don't know that Heinrich has the accuracy, and I'm not sure if he'd be as consistent. But like you said, what we saw last year with Purdy was very questionable, and he was skittish at times. So 7 single digits have been handed out so far. 5 were on defense, and the linebackers got 3 of them. Nick Henrich got number 3, Luke Reimer got number 4, and John Bullock got number 5. So in our first interview, you had mentioned that the running backs were the strongest unit on the team. Do you think there's an argument to be made that the linebackers are actually the strongest unit on the team since they have the most support around them with the D-line and the DBs?
I think with Bullock getting a single digit number, there was already an argument to be had. Like, had you asked, hey, what's the next group up? I would have said linebackers. And when I interviewed Tony White and I said, hey, who stood out so far? He named all 3 of those guys. And I'll tell you what, man, when I asked him for kind of an under the radar list, it was a lengthy freaking list. And I don't think he just rattled off a bunch of guys just to rattle off a bunch of names. So I think there are some guys with some bright futures there. And Bullock was one of the guys that he named along with Luke and Nick. So I think there's an absolute argument to be made when, you know, almost 50% of the single digit numbers goes to one group. So, you know, maybe that balance of power has switched. You know, if Anthony is truly fumbling a ton and 3 of those guys have the single digits and the linebacker core, I think there's an argument and a debate to be had for sure.
Yeah, well, it's like you said, if you don't have support as a running back from your offensive line, are you going to be able to be as successful? Whereas the linebackers, I think, have more around them, which makes me really anxious to see how they look. So Rule said that the kickers struggled in their last scrimmage and that he won't name a starter until after Thursday. But if Bleekrod and Alvano both look the exact same, they hit the same amount of kicks, what's your prediction? Do you think Rule goes with the younger guy to develop him, or do you think he puts his trust in the senior?
Well, I think you go with the younger guy because he has the bigger leg. Um, I'm always gonna if accuracy is about the same, I'm always gonna go with the bigger leg, so to speak. So he's also proven, won the was a high school state championship game with what, a 50+ yard kick, if I'm remembering that right. So he's proven that he can do it in a big moment. He's proven he's got the bigger leg. I do think his ceiling is higher. So regardless of their age or tenure, I'm going to go with the guy with the bigger leg unless there's, quite a disparity when it comes to accuracy.
Definitely want a guy who can make the long ones, and Alvano seems to be that. There is a lot of newness for both teams, but I want to know what the main key is to beating Minnesota.
I can come up with 3 or 4 pretty easy. Trying to narrow it down to one, that's tough.
Give me whatever ones you want to give, because I'm sure people are sitting here and they'll want to hear all of it.
Well, I will give you the one that when I narrowed it down, but I'll give you more. Being physical, because that translates into so much. That translates into blocking. That translates into how the ball carriers run with the football. It translates into tackling. Being a physical football team. Minnesota consistently has beaten us in recent years. They don't out-talent us. They out-physical us. They out-football us. It's been the same thing with Iowa up until last year. They don't have more talent than we are. They don't have as much talent as we do most of the years. Neither does Wisconsin. They out-physical, out-smash mouth, and out-football us. So if I was to pick one thing, because it carries over into so many aspects of the game, it would be physicality. Now, if I was to give more than one, the offensive line, and I know this is a part of being physical, but they got to protect the quarterback. They got to block. They've got to be better than what they've been. And when you have Nardine Willie coming back, who was your best guard, you got Ben Scott, who is an upgraded center. And I know Prohaska's been beat up, but if that guy can stay on the field, the one real game action he got was against Northwestern, so it gave everyone all warm and fuzzies. But what does he do against a little better competition? I've been curious to see that for quite a while. So, and then you're hopeful at some point, Bryce Benhart, Turner Corcoran, who I don't even know if they're upperclassmen yet. They are, but they've been here for like 54 years. At some point, that experience has to kick in, along with them being highly touted recruits at the time. It's not like we have a small O-line. We have big O-linemen. We have O-linemen who were highly recruited. Okay, 3 of the 5 were very highly recruited if you incorporate Prohaska as well. And, Piper, Ethan's been talked about very well this fall camp. So somewhere he's got to be in that fold a little bit, whether it's a starter, whether we have some depth on this line, So physicality, offensively, the offensive line, and defensively, I think I'm gonna go to the trenches again, because I feel good about the linebacking core. I feel decent about the back end. I'm gonna go to the defensive line, and can we get pressure on the quarterback? And I know we're gonna blitz, and I know we're gonna blitz from everywhere, because that's kind of the idea behind the 3-3-5. But are there times, because we are going to have 4-man down sometimes as well, are there going to be times we can get after the quarterback without always having to blitz? Is somebody going to step up and be a pass rusher? So those would be my main things, is being physical. The next 2 would be offensive line, just playing better, and the defensive line, and anybody who's a pass rusher in pass rushing situations, whoever has their hand in the dirt, can we actually get after the quarterback without having to bring the house all the time?
Physicality has been such a glaring issue in so many of these Big Ten West games. So I think Matt Rule understands that. I'm sure that's what he's preaching in practice. And that gives me a lot more hope for this first game, because I don't think Minnesota's that good of a football team. I think they're just so clearly more physical, and they have been for so long. Adam, that's all I've got for you today. I appreciate you coming on, and I'm excited for any more content you're going to drop leading up to this Minnesota game.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I always enjoy coming on. I've got Larry the Cable Guy. I believe I'm going to drop that on Thursday of this week. Then Rex Burkhead is the last interview in that series. And at some point, I'll do a preview and prediction show for Minnesota, probably, maybe Sunday or Monday of next week. But I'm also kind of anticipating, at some point, black shirts are going to be handed out. And so, I think they're going to do something a little bit different, maybe put their twist on it, maybe not.
There's a
But
lot.
I'm curious to see who gets those. I'll get my thoughts on that. And if they do something a little bit different or put a twist on it, I'm curious to see what that is and chatting about that.
Yeah, those are all good things that you already have insight on because you went through those experiences. And there's a lot for you to talk about. I was curious though, what are your reactions going to be like after the games? Are you giving gut reactions this year? Are you doing live streams? What's your plan?
Yeah, so this year, always got the gut reactions. It's funny. My brother-in-law, Phil, it was his idea to do those years ago because when I first started doing the Chronicles, it was actually articles or really long Facebook posts, whatever the case may be. And I'd post it to Twitter too. But it was always on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Central Time. And then I started doing shows. And then I started putting out reaction shows on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Central Time. He's like, dude, after the games, I'm either really happy, like from his perspective, he goes, I'm either really happy or really mad. Like, you should do a show then. You'd get way bigger reactions. And I hated that idea. I hated that idea because I can't analyze and break anything down yet. I hated that idea because I didn't want a camera in front of my face if I was really mad. I hated that idea because I just wanted to move on with the rest of my day once whatever had happened with the Nebraska football program that particular day had happened, once the game was over. And so now I think they're one of the things people look forward to the most. And I don't think I've ever told him thank you to this day for his awfully wonderful idea that I did not like at first. So anyways, I digress. Gut reactions are a must. So we're going to be doing those. And they're actually one of the things I look forward to doing the most now. And then I'll be doing press conference reactions. I think Rule's going to do his press conferences on Mondays, maybe Tuesdays, but I'll react to each and every press conference. I'll probably continue to do player interviews throughout the weeks as well, and probably preview and prediction shows as well. The one thing that is not coming back, and I'm gonna put out something on my Facebook and Twitter probably this Sunday night, actually. Carriker Live is not coming back, and that was a tough one for me. That show is going on year 6, and it took more time and effort than anything else. More time and effort than the Chronicles. It took more time and effort because it's live. It took more time and effort because it was on Sunday nights, and just a lot of things went into that. And to get a show like that established, and I'd get messages from people, can't wait to hear what you say on Sunday night, all this and that. And to not bring a show like that back that's got a sponsor, I literally had to take the sponsors and transfer them somewhere else and hope they were okay with it. And thank God they were. That was a tough decision for me. And at first I was not going to do the Big Ten show. That's the show I wasn't going to do. I've been fortunate enough, you got the Chronicles, the Big Ten show, the ticket, Carriker Live, a lot of fortunate blessings. But I had to narrow it down a little bit. And, my wife and I, she's like, we need to chat about this one more time. Because how do you not do the Big Ten show? She's like, I'm a college football fiend in general. She's like, you've been wanting to talk about college football. She's like, you're going to talk Nebraska football. Chronicles ain't going nowhere. But you've been wanting to talk about other teams for a long time. And it was in my mind that I was not going to leave that program because of everything that went into it, how much it meant, how much I looked forward to it every Sunday night. It started as articles and then just built. But she looked at me at one point, we were debating the pros and cons, and she goes, it would be really nice to have our Sunday nights back in the fall. And she kind of hit me with that. And I was like, wow, that's a really good point. And she goes, what about 5-10 years from now? We want to do something, maybe one of our kids is married or something like that. Jacob would be, I guess, 24, 25. I don't know if I'll have kids yet at that point, but maybe we want to do something on a Sunday evening in the fall or watch a game. And she's like, the Big Ten show, there's more flexibility. And so she kind of hit me with that. And I was like, dang. So long story short, Carriker Chronicles never going anywhere. Doing 93.7 the ticket. DP's doing some great things there. Derek Pearson, and then the Big Ten show. I'm pretty excited about. And before people tell me I'm selling out, no, I'm actually making less money doing the Big Ten show than I was Carriker Live. I'm just excited to expand my horizons. So those will be the 3 things I'll be kind of my platforms that I'll be chatting about: Big Ten Chronicles and the tickets throughout this season. So I'm pretty excited. These are all very, very, very first world problems, Connor. I'm well aware of this. So, but it was just hard for me to pass on doing that going forward because it's something I'd enjoyed for so long and put a lot of time and effort into. But I'm excited about the Big Ten show and the ticket and the Chronicles and everything else going forward. So,
It makes sense. It's tough to say, okay, I'm going to go and carve out this major part of my weekend to go and do all this content. It's something I have to battle with myself. So I get it. And there's a ton of other content you're dropping. So people are going to still get to see you and get to hear all your takes either way. I'm going to make sure that I link your channel below in the description box. So anyone who hasn't subscribed to Carriker Chronicles yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button on his channel, because it makes it so you can see all of his videos and it helps support Adam as a creator. I know you guys are watching his videos anyway, so just make sure you hit that subscribe button just like you do for me, because I'm telling you, it helps a ton, especially when we're putting all this work in. Adam, I appreciate you a ton for coming on the show. I can't wait to have you back on. I'm sure we'll connect here in the next few weeks once we're into the season. I'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate you having me. Thanks, Connor.
All right, and for everybody else, until next time, I'll see you in the next one. Go Big Red.